to Treasures in Heaven. I'm Daniel Catone, CEO of Arimathea and host today. I'm very excited about our guest. I would like to introduce everyone to Professor Mark Hoipkemier. There's a K in the middle of his last name, so he's a philosopher, I would say, and a political economist from Notre Dame. And he has written a book called The Price of the Common Good. And he has a lot to say about how businesses should function in this economy of ours. And we're going to be exploring these topics and giving you some practical tips of how you can interact with the common good yourself today. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, this is exciting. So you've written a fascinating book. And I think that the title can almost be a little bit intimidating, I think, if folks don't know the philosophy behind the term. You know, I'm reminded of a meeting that I attended years ago at the United Nations, and there was these three luminaries in finance up on the stage, and they're going on and on about the common good, and none of them had a philosophical background. And I found that a little challenging in a sense, because this is a concept with a deep pedigree in philosophy and in our lives and the church teachings. And so common good as an idea, I mean, would you say it originates with Aristotle, or would you say that the phrase is older than that? Where does this concept come from?
Well, as a concept, I think pretty much, or as a philosophical concept, it comes from Aristotle, or he's usually thought to be the father. I mean, it kind of appears in other people, but he's generally the fountainhead. Mm-hmm. It was something like this it was not something that he made up, though. It was a fairly standard concept in sort of Greek life and Greek politics. He was taking, as he usually did, taking concepts that people already had or were using and giving them, clarifying them, seeing what they were really all about. So you could say it came out of the experience of people living together politically or whatever. And I think that's still pretty relevant because to me, the common good is not or shouldn't be primarily a sort of a grand philosophy concept. It should be a concept that at least has one foot in basically people acting together and trying to say to each other, what should we be doing together? And at some point when you're having this kind of practical discussion, you end up needing this concept. So it's not just, there's God, there's human nature, and that points us to the common good. Normal people's lives, so to speak, need this. They might find that they need it at some point.
Well, I think there's some immediate irony in what you just said. I mean, you mentioned the Fountainhead, which is Ayn Rand's one of her big works. And not a Ayn Rand fan myself. Yeah, I figured as much, but I don't think she believed in the common good at all.
I doubt it. Or maybe if anyone on that tradition would mention the common good, they would be using a version that's very different from, if not totally antithetical to what either Aristotle or the Catholic tradition would understand.
Probably specifically anathematized at some point. So maybe we can start definitionally. I mean, I'll joke around and say Saint Aristotle. I am a big lover of Aristotle and his contribution to human flourishing, I would argue. So can you start, Professor, with just telling us from a non-academic perspective, what is the common good?
Whew, that's a big question. Well, I think for me, the first thing to start with, if you're trying to approach the topic, is to think of the common good not as a big sort of a thing out there. There's a thing that you could point to called the common good. It's more like a class of goods, or it's a way we flourish, or something like this. And I think you can get at the meaning of the common good. Well, if you think about, first you have to think about what's not the common good, or how do you contrast common good as opposed to what? And the best contrast here, I think, is the idea of a private good or an individual good. So you have common goods on the one hand and you have private goods on the other. And those are sort of conceptual opposites. So if something is a common good, or if you're thinking of something as a common good, you're not thinking of it as a private good. And one way you can get at this meaning is think about a birthday party. What makes a good birthday party? If it's your birthday or child's birthday, on the one hand, you have the presents that the kid gets. The child is interested in presents. He's happy to get them and whatever. But then once he gets those presents, he can take the presents away and, take them to his room after the party and enjoy them. So this is what I would call a private good. So that's part of what a good birthday party is about. But on the other hand, you'd also have sort of the experience, or the ambiance of the birthday party. It's not just about him getting a stack of presents. It's about people celebrating together, people being happy, et cetera, et cetera. And that, if you think about that, that's not the kind of thing that the kid can take away and enjoy on his own. That's the sort of thing that you can only enjoy the ambiance of the party by being at the party and then being with the other people. So it's a good that's either you have it in common, either everyone has the good ambiance to some degree, or no one has it at all. So that kind of, so you could call it an irreducibly social good, or a good that basically it's always kind of shared or not had. So that kind of gets at the distinction between the general sort of, what does it mean to say something is a common good? It's the kind of thing that you can, a private good is the kind of thing that you can enjoy on your own and sort of good for you as an individual. It's good, but common goods are the kind of things that you can only enjoy by participating in some group, in some organization with other people. So either shared or you don't have them at all.
Got it.
So
I mean, that makes sense. And I appreciate that. You mind if I call you Mark?
Absolutely. Go
Good,
ahead.
because I'll lose that K every time I say your name.
But no worries.
No, I appreciate that. So let me name a couple items, and then you tell me, is this an individual good or is this a common good, to help the audience understand this? So maybe we can start with the sort of the point of what Arimathea is all about, and maybe a little bit about what you're writing. So here's a $5 bill in my pocket. Is this a participation in the common good by my ownership of this, or is it an individual good?
Well, one of the complications here is that almost anything can be a common good depending on how you treat it or how you're looking at it. So you could, if you're looking at that, if you're thinking about that $5 bill as just something that you can use to get, buy an ice cream or a beer, you'd be treating it as a private good. On the other hand, if you're thinking about it as something that is, let's say, a resource that you can use for your family, then you'd be sort of orienting it with respect to a common good. Or you could think about it as, let's say that was $1,000 that you made in profit from your Arimathea made $1,000 in profit. Everyone was working together. Things are going great. So that, if you think about it as something that you guys have made together, you'd also be thinking about it as a common good in the sense of a product or something that we have made. So of course you can just think about it in itself. And I guess money is easy to think about as a private good because it's sort of just a very abstract and we all want it, et cetera, et cetera. But there's things, so if you see it as related to the flourishing of some community, basically, or in relation to some community, then you're going to be seeing it as a common good. There are some, basically, it sort of works like this. There are some things that can only be common goods, like friendship or the ambiance at the party. You can only have a friend if you have a real relationship with another person. But there are lots of other things that can either be seen as common goods or as private goods, like money. Normally we see it as a private good, but if you see it in a certain way or you treat it in a certain way, then you're seeing it as a common good.
I see. So it's really a utilization question in a way. It's the money itself is not a common good or an individual good until its application or its transference of value to particular objects.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of how are you thinking about it, or how are you using it? What is the perspective you're taking on it? So you can see it as part of a common good, and that requires you to think about it in a certain way, or you can see it as a private good.
Okay.
But in itself, I guess it's not yet a common good until it shows up.
Okay. Now I'm gonna give you a hard one. I know you're not a theologian.
Okay.
And I'm not either, so we might not either know the answer. What about baptism?
Oh, well,
so it's a good one, right?
I mean, the sacraments are interesting. I mean, and then as I said, the one way to deal with this is to think about things. You can think about things as a private good, i.e., as a good for me as an individual. Now, you could think of baptism as my ticket to heaven, so to speak. I get baptized, you didn't get baptized, so in the sense, it's good for me, and if someone else doesn't get baptized, so it looks like a private good. But then you'd have to ask yourself, well, is that an adequate way to think? Is there a way in which you can sort of really think about baptism, or to what extent can we think about it just like that? And as opposed to money, where thinking about it as a private good is, mostly kind of describes fairly well how it works. Baptism, this is like drastically reductive. For one thing, where does baptism come from? I mean, it comes from and what is it? It's your participation in the life of grace. And your induction into the church. And these are all things that are shared with other people, or not had at all. So in that regard, a more adequate view of that in that regard is baptism is clearly a common good, or it's making reference to a community that you get it from. And you also think about where you're going. I mean, there's a way of
theosis automatically moves it to the common good space.
Well, right. I mean, at least a minimum, you have God there. It's you and God. But even then, there are lots of other people as well. So, or you could say,
but you have the communal event of a baptism, which is like the party.
Well, there's that, and then there's the fact that baptism has to have a minister. It's always given by one person to another person. Even if one person isn't baptized, you have to have it conferred by one unto another. So you can't baptize yourself. There, in that regard, it's also always communal. And if you think about salvation, if baptism is your ticket to salvation, again, you could think of heaven, or this is like a ticket a train that I get on. But what is, I mean, if you think a bit more deeply or theologically or whatever about what salvation is, or at least I would think of it as an induction into the life of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like your entryway into a community, into that sort of heavenly birthday party, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's not only does it come from a group or a community that's giving it to you, it's also actually an invitation into something that's inherently communal. So
I appreciate that. I think you're. I agree with you completely. And I think I want to say the classical explanation for common good is the shared victory of the army. I think that's one that you commonly hear. So if you join the military, the military wins. You didn't win it individually, but you all share in that collective victory, which is a definitional for the common good. Whereas the individual soldier who gets some spoils of war, let's say, that would not perhaps be participation in the common good, but an individual good for that lone soldier.
Right, exactly. I mean, or at least you could say it would be easy and not too damaging to think about the spoils of war as kind of a private good for him.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas thinking about the victory as something that I did or was just good for me, well, that's pretty silly. Like, that's obviously very distorting what's going on. Whereas the spoils of war, it's like, yeah, we got it, but I got this spoil, you got that spoil, and we kind of went home and we did stuff with our spoils. So the more you're talking about material goods and sort of stuff that you can put in your pocket and take away, the easier and maybe less distorting it is to think about those things as private goods, because it's good to have private goods are goods, and so it's not like everything has to be a common good or else it's bad or something like that. That would just be, that's like a kind of common good romanticism or something that I think we ought to resist. But there are some things that if you think about them not as common goods, like baptism or maybe victory, then you're really kind of missing the ball as to what's really going on.
Yeah, I hear you. This is fascinating. And I guess maybe where we could go with this is the reason for your book. You're a political economist, and you've written your book about the way in which businesses function and how they participate in the common good. And so what's interesting, I think, about this is you're approaching the common good in a different way when compared with the way Arimathea, for example, approaches the common good. Both arriving at a common destination, though, I believe. I think what you have argued for is the activity of the business itself, its intrinsic behaviors.
Right.
That is participation of the common good. We're looking from an external perspective to invest in the company and saying, our investment that we're making, is it participatory in the common good or not? And that's, the Catholic social teaching kind of perspective. And so I think you have taken the concepts of the common good and Catholic social teaching and brought them inside the corporation.
Exactly.
And I think in a sense, you've renewed the definition of corporation being something that's shared in common amongst the owners, this corporate behavior, corporate mentality, communal behavior. And I think that's very interesting that you've done that. So perhaps you can share with our audience a little bit about your ideas of the common good in relation to business activity and behavior.
Well, I think about the broad approach point that you were just making. There's a standard view of the common good, or you even reflected in the phrase, the common good, which sort of suggests one big thing out there. It's usually the flourishing of all of society, or maybe all of humanity, or maybe all of the universe.
It's a little utilitarian.
Way out there. It's pretty far out there. And everything else is sort of, things that are good are somehow participating in that or serving that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that's wrong, but for me, that would be, you can find common goods are more particular than that. That a family, for example, has its own common good that's shared in common by the members of the family and not, or at least not in the same way, by other people. So it's good for me that your family would be doing well, but that doesn't really make me a member of your family. Like, I'm glad you had a good birthday party, but I wasn't there. And so it's like, there's a sense in which I could see it as good for our larger community, et cetera, et cetera. So we have these, I think of as there being this is sort of references something like subsidiarity as being a hierarchy or an order of, you have larger common goods like, our whole country or the church or the universe, but within them you have smaller ones that are shared by smaller sets of people, particular parishes, particular families, or in the case you mentioned, particular businesses. Now, we don't usually think about businesses as being their own having their own kind of common good. So normally would think they're just serving the common good of some larger thing by producing goods and
Right.
services, because they themselves are sort of maybe self-interested. But then once they like put their services at the service, or put their goods and services at the service of society, something like this, then it's serving the common good. I think that's a mistake because it misconstrues how businesses actually work,
Hmm.
or what a business actually is. That a business itself is a bunch of people coming together, acting in common as a kind of little community. And if you want to understand what's really so, already there, any business, I think, given the fact that how people cooperate in businesses, they're already creating a certain kind of community. They're putting a good in common among themselves.
Hmm.
That can then be put at the service of a larger community, of the church or the society or whatever, which is good. But that there's already kind of an integrity as a little community with its own common good to a business in a way that's sort of analogous to a family. I mean, I don't think businesses are families. There's lots of relevant differences, but they at least count as little communities with their own common good, which in part means they allows them to do something sort of unique with respect, to their societal contribution. They're supposed to
Hmm.
do their thing, and also gives them a kind of integrity, or in you might even say inviolability with respect
Hmm.
to the larger. Just like we say, we wouldn't want the state or something to intervene in families
Hmm.
because that would damage the life of the family. Likewise, some kind of external intervention or too much external thinking or intervention would damage the life of a business. I mean,
Hmm.
the classic.
Well, I think it may perhaps damage life in business maybe that's maybe stronger than I might place it.
Sure.
But certainly changing the locus of that common good.
Right.
So, you have like you were describing, the overall societal common good. So,
Right.
Tesla produces cars that benefit overly, society overall because they're
Right.
electric and, environment or something like that. And
Yep.
then you can kind of reduce down from that to the common goods that are within the corporation
Right.
itself. And I think you look at Rerum Novarum, which I think identifies the common good as participatory within the corporation of owners and workers together
Right.
rather than just owners, which I think is the
Right.
common sort of misconception that people have.
Yep.
And then to add another layer of complexity, or really two more, you have the customer's participation or interaction with the common
Right.
good. And then you also would have, uh, I mean, it's difficult to frame this because you have society and then you have the corporation, you have the customers, which kind of touch both, and then you
Hmm.
have the workers, which are also touching both. I mean, it's difficult to draw these lines, perhaps.
Right. Well, yeah, that's right. So the way I think about it is, I would say any common good or real world common good. We explained the genuine sort of
Mhm.
general concept of the common good, but any actual common good is the common good of some kind of determinate community or
Mhm.
social form. Could be a
Mhm.
family, could be a business, etc. But I think if you want to talk about a common good or our common good, you have to say who we are, what this kind of community is. And so
Mhm.
you share. So if you want to ask about a common good, like of a business, you have to say, well, first thing, or one of the first things you have to ask is like, who's actually in this business? Who is the one that's really sharing it in a kind of a full way? Now, one way, and so you can answer this question in lots of different ways. Um, and you say those are the people who share this common good. So, as you say, the Catholic tradition has often emphasized that it's not just, so to speak, shareholders or
Yeah.
investors who own it, but there's a kind of community between workers and investors or management and labor, all these kinds of things, that they're forming their own sort of community. I mean, that's clear, that's
Mhm.
and very consistent from Rerum Novarum
Mhm.
through Centesimus Annus and elsewhere.
Mhm.
So they form their own sort of little community. And so there was always a live Catholic debate about whether workers had to be share. Could you just sign a wage contract, or in order to properly share in that community, did you need to be a part owner or be share a profit? There's which are different ways of expressing the idea that you're actually in the community. You're really a member of it rather than just a person outside who happens to sell them something. If that was
Yes.
the case, that would be just a matter of community of justice, making sure you give them the right thing, and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
No,
But
I
the
think
idea
I think this is
is
fair
something more.
points, and perhaps I'll challenge you a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, what if I could I argue? I guess I will argue. Saint Paul talks about the body of all believers. The body, the
Hmm.
common body of Christ, and his experience
Right.
of his conversion. Saint Paul. Paul, why are you persecuting me?
Right.
And so, his argument I could perhaps make is that there every single good of the church and its body is common.
Hmm. Hmm.
So my $5 in my pocket, while it seemingly is only an individual good, my benefit is the benefit of the overall body.
Hmm.
My detriments to me is detriments to the whole body, and that's the
Yep.
argument that Paul makes. And so he's kind of reducing the common good, or perhaps expanding the common good to be
Hmm.
inclusive of all individual goods and all corporate or shared goods.
Right.
They're all united in Christ's body, and so it's really a distinction without a difference.
Yeah, so that's a question. Again, I'm not an ecclesiologist, but I love thinking about these sorts of things. You could ask a question about the church, which is the same thing you could ask um, about sort of politics or civil society.
Mhm.
Is it best conceived of as one big community or organization with a bunch of where and everyone is a member, or is it better conceived of as an organization or a community that has sub communities within it that have their own kind of autonomy? So if it's just one big community, and this is a little bit like, we have one pope, one leader, so there's clearly some kind of unity there.
Of course.
If that were the case, then every good of me as a Christian or as a member of the church would be properly conceived of as sort of a good for the whole church and serving the whole church.
And that's St. Paul's argument.
Right. So, which I think is certainly a way of thinking of it. But another way of thinking of it would be, well, are there relevant distinctions within smaller common goods within the church that are shared in different ways by special people? Like, is the good of a religious order shared in a particularly an intense and life-changing way by the members of that religious order? The first order Dominicans and the third order Dominicans or whatever. Like, there's maybe a little Dominican community. They're at the service of the larger church, so in a sense they are, but they have their own kind of distinctive thing, their distinctive charism, et cetera, et cetera. The more you emphasize that there's a subgroup, the more you'd want to say, well, all their goods may be common goods for everybody, but at least they're not common goods for everyone in the same way, in the sense that someone who's not a Dominican and someone who is a Dominican like shares in them in a different way. So again, they could benefit the church and they should be seen as common in some way, but do we need to distinguish between what the religious orders or other charisms or parishes or dioceses, different, the church is made up of lots of little communities, and canon law recognizes, like, it actually gives them a status. And so we'd have to ask ourselves, like, does this sort of, if not interrupt the communion, so to speak, at least articulate the communion? Like, we have a kind of level of communion among these people, which is shared with other people. Like, it seems like our communion with American Catholics, for example, is a bit different than it is with African Catholics. We are all about members of the body of Christ, but the decisions that are made here, the trials and tribulations of our church seem a little different. They are, in a sense, the trials and tribulations of the whole body. But it's a little bit like, we're part of the liver, and like,
Mm-hmm.
as liver members, we maybe have something more in common with the other bits of the liver than we do with the toes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, the difference is that livers and toes are just parts of, and we are wholes. Anyway,
But
so
it seems
you
like
have to
just a
ask
Catholic
yourself, like,
rejection of extremes. Like the extreme
right,
individualism is rejected by the
right,
faith, and the extreme communalism is also excluded from
right,
consideration here. And so I think what you're elucidating for everyone is that there is a general common good and participation for all goods for every person, the hand and the eye and all that, that's St. Paul's
right,
saying. And then you just dive more specifically and say, and then there's these goods which are uniquely shared amongst these subgroups within the church that
right,
do benefit the overall whole, but they're identifiable as unique.
right.
Yeah.
Right, and they're shared in common in a different way by the people who are, close to them or
Mm-hmm.
producing them or whatever. So the contemplative, we all share in the fruit of, say, the contemplative orders.
Mm-hmm.
They do this wonderful, beautiful thing that benefits the whole church in grace and whatever. But that doesn't mean I'm not really sure what it's like to be a cloistered contemplative, because I'm not one, and I'm assuming they meet God in a way that's a bit different than me, and that experience of theirs is sort of put in common and benefits me, but it doesn't mean that there's not a meaningful difference between them and me. And I think that would be sort of saying, well, we are meant to put our individual goods at the service of the body, but that doesn't make us all exactly the same, as though we're sort of just one sort of undifferentiated church or something like that. It seems to me, I mean, at least I think about it, the articulations or the sub levels are more
it's
salient.
actually very simple by analogy. A field of flowers is a field of flowers, and each individual flower has its own unique beauty, even if it's all shared in common amongst the field. So I appreciate that very much, and I want to shift gears a little bit. I think we've hit the common good, I think, pretty well here.
Yeah.
You're a political economist. Like, I think everyone knows what an economist is. Sometimes I wonder if economists know what economists are, but what is a political, like, what is political about it? It sounds a little Marxist to me. So I want to disentangle that and show us why I'm wrong there.
Well, I would not put any too much weight on political economy. I have a degree in political theory. If you followed my degrees, I'm a political theorist who studies the economy.
Uh-huh.
Today, political economy, I think, well, it means a few different things. The way I would use it, it's one thing it can mean is something like people who study the economy but are not neoclassical economists. So I don't use marginal utility models or quantification, but are interested in the economy. So that's one, and that's of course, but then there's people who do all sorts of things. I'm a Catholic, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have other kinds of heterodox, this and that, Austrians, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
They're all political economists. Another way you have use political economy would be people who this is the sort of.
By the way, I love your generosity in saying the Austrians are heterodox. That's very generous of you.
Oh, well, I mean, it depends on how far back you zoom out.
Yeah.
If you're neoclassical, you think they are. If you're a Catholic, maybe you think they're not.
Yeah.
Another way of using it is actually people who use economic models and thinking to study politics. So I think this is, I'm definitely not one of these people. So that we can take rational choice models, which more or less come from economics, and then study constitutions or organizations or whatever. So if you go to kind of the more classical liberal world or the world of PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics, you find lots of these things. And they're kind of dominated by a rational choicey maximizing way of thinking. So I think that we should definitely set aside. The other thing where we study we're allowed to study the economy, so to speak, with concepts that come from philosophy or theology or whatever, because I think these are actually present and operative in the real economy as we know it. And so if we really want to understand what a business is, you have to understand something about politics, something about theology, et cetera, because these things are relevant. Doesn't mean everything about business has something to do with theology or politics, but at least something does, or ways of thinking about it. And so to me, if I were to endorse the title of political economist or say I study political economy, it's because of that, because we need a broader view on an economy to understand what's really going on. Not to mention, it makes sense of the Catholic tradition of thinking about what it is and what it ought to be, which is not restricted to some kind of maximizing rational choice model.
Maximizing rational choice model, which you're actually assaulting a very specific approach to political economics. And I think maybe from if we step back for a second, to disentangle politics and polity from economics, because it feels as if politics and the political sciences is a superior science to the economics, in that politics is the exchange and use of power amongst a group of persons, and it can be done in a family, it can be done in a government, it can be done in a business. Economics being the exchange or the analytical approach, whatever school you choose, to the exchange of value amongst people, which is a subset in a sense of power, because money can be powerful, but power is not necessarily monetary. So the overlay that you've chosen, which is political on economics, is interesting, because I think there's a lot of folks out there. You mentioned the Austrians. They might be very disturbed by what you said. I think that there is a political overlay to economics. I think they would revolt against that. And I think calling that heterodox, again, I think that's a generous statement. I think it's heretical if you were to bring a theological lens to it. I'm not an Austrian economist kind of guy, certainly no Marxist, but I think disentangling politics from economics is important. You've combined them into this analytical framework, which I think is very interesting. So perhaps from a practical perspective, why does this matter to a Catholic? Why does political economy matter at all? Or maybe I'll give you, you've probably heard this phrase, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. So what does it matter to the average listener of this show, what political economy is and what it has to say?
Well, I think it's because actually the world that we all inhabit is significantly shaped and formed around the ideas and more broadly kind of the imaginary of economics. Especially if you're talking about the economy. We sort of take the economists as the authorities about the economy. What an economist, a neoclassical economist, would say is the economy is primarily concerned with, the free exchange of goods and services, private property, markets, contracts. And that's what's going on in the economy. And if you want to understand an economy, you have to think about people as rational individuals who are trying to get the best deals for themselves, and sort of how do we build a system in which, these exchanges are good for everybody and they're prosperous and we get wealthier, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of the economic imaginary of what an economy is. And that, I mean, that's going to sound very intuitive or maybe like 100% obvious to anybody, in part because it's right. I think because that the economy, whatever that might be, does reflect that kind of thinking to a large degree. But also there's another part of it that's just sort of, I don't know, ideological. Like if you actually look closer, you find that there's a lot more going on in the economy. If by the economy you mean markets and firms and what people do when they go to the store and what's on the financial pages, you take off the sort of hat of all we see as self-interested maximizing individuals. Then you realize, oh, wait a minute, people act in lots of different ways when they're at work, when they're investing, when they're buying and selling.
And the assumption of rationality is a huge one.
Well, right. I mean, the rationale, even of economists themselves, has spent the last 2 or 3 decades troubling that with psychology, but they're still trying to work within the same basic model, which says, people are biased, but they're trying to be rational, or like, that kind of thing. But their version of rationality is so narrow that
narrow.
I think if you, from that foundation, modify it however you want, you're never going to get an adequately full picture of it.
I think they just they say rationality is the same as self-interest.
Right.
So it's just swap the terms.
Right. It's the rationality is basically the intelligent pursuit of self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
Like if something is in your interest, it's rational to pursue it. And some people mistake what's in their interest, or they can't figure out what the right way to do it. But that's really all there is, because that's their view of a human being is a self-interested maximizer. And people will give you caveats and stuff, but this view I think is still very much at the basis of economics as an academic discipline, and also of our kind of collective imaginary of what the economy is about.
So when we live about,
what firms do, what markets do, why they're there, we're basically, once you have the first thing we always grab at is that kind of model, that people are basically being self-interested and maximizing and trying, signing contracts for this. In part because we built that world, and in part because it's fairly true, but in part it's just sort of, we have this limited blinder vision about that's all we can see. So if there's a reason we should think in more political economy terms, or just more Catholic terms, is to see the other stuff that's going on there. Because if you think it's like, you might say, well, this is all we need to manage a good economy. Like your extra stuff about theology or your extra stuff about philosophy or whatever, like it's nice for you to do, but we can explain what's going on. We can guide the economy well. We can predict what's going to happen. But that actually turns out to be wrong. So, and if that were the case, I could sign on to that. But it's not the case, and we're seeing it more. It's not the case that this model gives us a lot of what we need, and I think economists know lots about the economy that I don't know, and I'm very glad they're there doing their data-centered stuff. It's great. I imagine as an investor, you use plenty of economic type tools and thinking. Again, they're fine in their place, but the idea is their place is not the whole thing. So there's some other part that's worthwhile that you need to see that's going to affect you as a worker, as a buyer, as an investor, as whatever. And if you're not willing to sort of get a little bit beyond that and think, oh, there might be something else going on here that's relevant to me as in my quest for happiness, but even just for a flourishing economy or a healthy business, that a business that thinks in just these ways is going to fail.
Well, Mark, are you a capitalist?
Am I a capitalist?
Yeah.
If you mean by a capitalist, someone who broadly, well, how about this?
I'll let you define it as you wish.
The same kind of capitalist as Leo XIII or John Paul II.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I appreciate that.
Question with a question.
I know that's okay. I'm just kind of messing with you a little bit.
Do I think, generally speaking, markets and businesses are okay, or at least can be okay? They're not intrinsically evil. They're not intrinsically corrupting of human beings. Certainly. And the more you see them in their fullness, the more you can see why that's the case. So in that regard, I think, and that this book I have written is not meant to be either a defense or a critique of our economy. It's trying to give us better eyes to see both the good and the bad there. So
I think seeing the good and the bad is a necessary function of a Catholic, because this is not our world. We are not of this world. We're only passing through sojourners on our way to our home. And so when you look, I think it could be argued that the American economic system is the most capitalist system that's ever existed in human history. I mean, obviously you could quibble about this nation or that nation, but I think fundamentally, I think we could agree upon that. And I think we would also agree, Mark, that the system in which we are functioning in, with this attempt at the common good, I think from a Catholic perspective, is imperfect, as all human systems are imperfect because they're not divine. we're
Mm-hmm.
imperfect. We cannot give what we do not have, and we cannot create with what we don't have either. So we create these imperfect systems. Okay, so assuming that the capitalist system that we do live in the United States is imperfect, is it possible for us to have the common good in an imperfect or unjust system? And I think it's an important question. I'll say the reason why I said I think it's an important question is it could be argued that the defects of capitalism in the system that we exist in the United States make the pursuit of the common good irrelevant, and that the individual good is the only one that truly matters. Shareholder value and all the ROI and everything else that we're looking for as investors
Mm-hmm.
and business owners. We're like, common good, that's a neat idea, but it's completely irrelevant to day-to-day functioning of American capitalism.
Yeah, right. I mean, it kind of depends what you think are the essential features of capitalism. Like, what can we do? Are we genuinely realizing a common good in our capitalism as we know it? Frequently not. Could we have a system that broadly resembles ours, that functions with a good deal of private property, business activity, markets, et cetera, that does realize the common good? I think so. So in that regard, I guess I'm a pro-capitalist. Would it require very deep reforms, both in the way we think and in laws and what we do? Yes. Would it be recognizably the same system? Yes. So I don't think, to my view, at least the common good doesn't have to be revolutionary. It could be a bit revolutionary. If you're sort of taking Alistair McIntyre view, he would say you have to burn the whole thing down and start over. It's something completely different. There's no way we're going to get there. I think I'm more optimistic because I think that, for example, businesses are sort of a community. And if they were to recognize what they were, reform them in ways that we are familiar with, the church has, or Catholics in general, have advocated workers sharing in profits, or workers sharing in management, or workers owning firms. Those are all, you could say, modalities of capitalism that are much more conducive to business realizing its own common good and, probably serving a richer version of the common good. So those are not versions of socialism, nor are they some kind of traditional, like, medieval economy. So you could see modifying capitalism in ways that leave it, it's still capitalistic or still business and market oriented, that promote the common good. But the changes required, or at least recommended, would be pretty deep.
Okay.
So,
well, let's start with one. I am an Alistair McIntyre fan. I think he passed away a couple years ago, and so pray for his soul. I believe he died. I think he died 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he died this year. Actually.
This year. Oh, was it this year? Yeah.
Yeah, he's buried at Notre Dame.
I did not know that. Well, hopefully you can pray for his soul at his gravesite. Beautiful thinker.
I actually did look on All Souls Day, or the day after. We were at we were at the cemetery where he was buried, and I prayed for him, although I couldn't find his grave.
Oh, that's why I'm sure the Lord can find it. So that's cool. So I think you've kind of set up a bit of a foil here. You've basically said that, Alistair McIntyre, After Virtue, which is, I think, his greatest work, he does kind of smuggle in his latent or ancient in his life Marxism. He was a Marxist. And his revolutionary zeal to destroy the whole system and build something new. I think that's kind of his perspective. And you've sort of set yourself in opposition to that and said, we don't need a revolution and burn the whole system down. But specific targeted reforms would be necessary for us to have a Catholic common good concept within American economics. So what is one of those reforms that you would advocate?
That's a good question. So I just mentioned, I guess when it comes to the firm, at least, I think the things that I would advocate above all have to do with governance. So basically ownership and who's in charge. What a firm needs to do in order to sort of be a community around a common good is to see itself as a group of persons working together for whom profit and sort of, narrowly speaking, economic thinking are just one part of the goal that they've got. So they need to see themselves as both, promoting, working together as a kind of community, as being oriented towards good practices that serve the world in a good way, et cetera, et cetera. Now, how do you get there? In a way, so they sort of need is a change of vision, which is a kind of an abstract thing. Like, well, you could just, insert a new microchip and everything would be the same. But I think the best way, and probably the most effective way, and the way that Catholics have usually opted for this to actually get there, is to change the question of who's in charge. Because as long as we let, say, shareholders or people whose interests are primarily interested in profit, as long as we let them call the shots, there is going to be a strong incentive not to look at those other things, or to say that the value of the person here, or the value of our virtue or our community or whatever is just a means to profit or an outgrowth or something like that, there's a strong incentive to go that direction. So in practice, it seems like what we ought to do, or at least one effect, this isn't required, but it may be the most effective, is to say, we're going to let other people make the decisions, people who value those, or at least some of the decisions, value those other aspects of the firm that are missing when all we see is profit. Mm-hmm. And so instead of letting or thinking that shareholders are the ones in charge and they're going to do a good job of serving healthy firms, maybe it could be workers, maybe it could be other people who have a different perspective on businesses and would be apt to think of businesses in a more kind of...
Let me stop you for a second. I mean, I think you kind of run into the problem of expertise here because, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you have an AI firm where they're doing very sophisticated artificial intelligence development, multidimensional math and higher dimensional math and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this stuff is exceedingly technical. And so asking the janitor what he thinks we should do as a business doesn't seem like the best idea for the business.
Well, I mean, it depends on what the question is. Asking him what he thinks about our product? Probably not. But asking him how it's going as far as our, how are we treating people and how the whole thing is, there are other questions about which anyone's going to have an intelligent, input. Mm-hmm. But some matters obviously require technical expertise, and it would be foolish to ask technical questions to those kind of people, to people who aren't technically savvy. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I totally agree with you that you wouldn't want to say, put every question to a committee of the whole company. That would be dumb,
Yes, a little too communist.
On the other hand, but there are some questions for which technical expertise is more or less irrelevant. So the guy who's great at AI, who happens to be in charge, isn't necessarily an expert in what makes in management or in people or in, or other kinds of things. So
Sam Altman.
Right.
His last name, Altman. I mean, that's
not
wild.
good at other stuff. If we put, and the one's Aristotle's kind of classical, I guess it would be roughly an Aristotelian insight, would be put a bunch of different kind of people in charge, have something like a mixed regime. Some people are are experts in this, some people are experts in that, somehow get them together and have them talk to each other. And chances are you're going to get a bit more of a balanced view.
Well,
so if you take only the technical people.
I'm going to challenge this a little bit. So the purpose of a business is what?
Well, the purpose of a business, very generically, or the purpose of any association would be to become a flourishing version of itself.
Okay. I think you haven't answered the question.
I agree. Okay, what kind of association is a business? I mean, I think generally a business is a kind of association that's there to produce some product at a profit, so to speak. I would say the purpose of a business generically is to profitably produce its product. So you want an excellent product, because what really serves society out there is the product itself. And the profits are necessary both to continue the life of the business, to have money to pay your workers, and to sort of generally enrich things. That's sort of distinctive about businesses.
Okay.
And there's something below that, of course, like when you say it's a community of profitable production or whatever, part of the purpose of a business is also to be a good community, because like any kind of community, for people to treat each other well.
But still at service to the profit and the product.
I mean, yes, but those things, certain kinds of things cannot be seen as instrumental to profit. So you would say, well, if we respect each other, will we have a better and more profitable company? Yes. Do we respect each other because we have a more profitable company? No. That would be hypocrisy, not respect. So if you actually want people to respect each other, they have to do it because it's sort of part of their goal or built into their end, not as an instrument to those other things.
I hear you. And I think there's a critique here that I think you might already be thinking about. And that is from the Austrians, from the profit-focused folks. They say, oh, that's nice that we can ask the janitor how he'd like to be treated. But at the end of the day, it's largely irrelevant and it's meaningless to the actual purpose of the business itself. And it's a nice thing. I mean, we should certainly do that if we, I don't know, if we start like a Rotary club together, want to make sure everybody's treated nicely and all that stuff, because it doesn't really make any difference. There's no profit involved. But what about when you have a conflict? I mean, when you have, well, we treat the janitor better, but it's going to harm our profit. Therefore, it's damaging the entire purpose of the business. Therefore, we're harming the common good.
Right. Well, I mean, I think
we're diminishing the common good.
I want to be as hard-nosed about the common good as you can be.
Do it.
Recognize that you've got to acknowledge there's going to be a conflict.
Yes.
That prioritizing profit over other things creates conflict with those things. So the idea that we can be maximally profitable and maximally other stuff is wrong. And we have to be able to have some way of sorting out those things. So you basically need to prioritize. Like businesses have to know they have a list of, I think, goods or ends that they're trying to get at. And in some cases, it might be worth, pursuing or emphasizing profit or productivity or whatever at the expense of the thing with the janitor. On the other hand, the janitor counts. And he also counts in the janitors who are unwilling, or like low-level people who are unmotivated or even antithetical to the vision of the company are actually going to damage the whole thing. So
just as a CEO in the same would,
well, of course, and the CEO even more so, but even the lower level people, they may not matter as much, but to say to have all of your line workers who don't really care, you're not going to have a very good company. I mean, you're going to have turnover, you're going to have sick leave problems. They're just not going to work very hard.
So aren't you just really still making subservient every single thing to profit in what you've just explained? Because I hear what you're saying. Like, we don't treat the janitor nice because we want profit, but that's a very difficult thing to disentangle for folks. I mean,
I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you that it's kind of subtle. And I mean, to me, frankly, you could remove profit as an end of the firm. Most people would think I'm trying not to be romantic. I think you could more or less remove profit as a goal and just call it a means to a bunch of other goals. It's like an important means. So that would be more effective in seeing like our goal is not profit. We have profit so that it's
human flourishing.
Invest so that we can make something great, so we can pay our people, blah, blah, blah.
Right. It's human flourishing. If you say human flourishing is the actual end of corporate decision making, profit is subservient to that. Yeah. And so therefore you're kind of hopping over profit motivation when you treat the janitor nice, because it's still at service to the true end of this unique community that's using profit to obtain human flourishing.
Right. So the way I do it in the book is I say the community has 4 sub ends, and the actual end of the firm is, again, to flourish as a firm. And that's some kind of order among what I call them property or profit, power, good products, and good practice. None of those are a means to any of the other ones. So it's wrong to say profit is the goal and the other. It's like that model, or that just image.
It's insufficient.
Wrong. Right. I mean, so of course you can't excessively de-emphasize profit, or else you're not talking about a business anymore.
Right.
So you have to leave it in there, as opposed to a nonprofit or a church or a family where profitability is not really an end. It's really just a means. In a business, it is kind of an end, I think, but it's not an end in the sense that
a subservient end.
It's others are supposed to serve that. They're all supposed to serve a broader project that you could call, flourish. I mean, I just call it flourishing as a business. And other people are like, what do you mean? And then
they're like, doesn't that just mean more profits?
Look at a successful business and ask what the people care about. Do they care about profit? They do. Do they care about their people? They do. Do they care about an excellent product? They do. Do they submit one of these to the other? No. Right. They have to deal with conflict somehow, but those are all clearly ends for them in a way that they would resist saying we do this one for the sake of that one. We just care about our products because of the money they make. No, we care about our AI stuff or about our car because we love AI stuff, or that's what we focus all day on, making a better thing. We care about the people because we care about people. Anyway, so I think
how do we smuggle? I mean, I agree with you. I think what you've laid out here with these 4 points is quite eloquent, and I think you've also diffused the argument that profit is the end of corporations, because it is an end, but it is an end that is subservient to the true end of all human activity, which is, the benefit and common good and all these types of things. But how do we do that with, you look at a company like Amazon, which makes unlimited money. They have unlimited resources, and they, generally speaking, treat their workers like automatons. And, I mean, we know this. We hear the stories of where they don't have bathroom breaks and horrible things the way they treat their employees. I mean, you have all these beautiful ideas and they really fit nicely in your book. What does Jeff Bezos care when he's getting married in Venice with his $28,000 shoes?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think Jeff Bezos does.
I don't think so either. Care. I don't think he cares.
What would this tell him to be? What
are we supposed to do? We're supposed to say, hey, you should be like this.
Well, your goal, Jeff Bezos, is to run a good company. And the company you're running is not a good company insofar. I mean, it's producing people, you love it. It does something great for the world in some ways, sure. but there are significant dimensions in which it's not good, and not because they're not. It's not like you could be more profitable. It doesn't need to be more profitable. It doesn't care. Amazon is very profitable. So in his case, like mistreating people is not harming the bottom line; it's helping the bottom line. So you again, you have to have a. If I were to like be able to convert Jeff Bezos,
There
I
you
would try to
go.
convert him to a more capacious vision of what his firm actually does, what those people do for him, what it would mean to be a good firm. Like in practice, again, maybe I ought to just say, Jeff Bezos, take on a German co-determination model.
Mm.
Make your board of directors half workers and see what happens. See what they want. Like they're gonna, if you want to, you're focusing too much on just one aspect of what you're up to,
Mm-hmm.
and you're unable to see, I assume, because you're a trillionaire and these people
Yeah.
are whatever, what all is actually going on in your firm.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, people, the firm is successful because people outside the firm like its products, and they don't know or care about what's going on inside. So how do you get it like a full view of a firm to say, like, how do we live up to what we're really doing? Like not treating people like automatons
Right.
or whatever, and like have a fuller vision. Again, one way is take some of the people who are actually there, who see the different things that are going on, put them in charge and see what happens.
Well, I think it's a question of a hierarchy of goods and also an orientation towards good. Jeff
But
Bezos, his motivation is, I don't know him. I don't know his actual self. Let's just pretend this is his motivation.
right.
His motivation is entirely self-interested. He just wants to have a life of luxury and ease, and it seems that he lives that way. And so I would argue that an American society that is divorced from Catholic social teaching cannot reform in the way that you've argued.
Hmm.
That the motivation for example, the partners at Arimathea, our motivation is to fulfill God's will and to
Mm-hmm.
follow our patron, St. Joseph of Arimathea. Those two values, I mean, if I were to bring those to a board meeting at Amazon, they would look at me like I had grown another head.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess maybe my question of, can this system that you're describing, which I think is very eloquent and beautiful, the way you've described it, can it even exist in this ocean of American capitalism? And I would argue, no, it cannot. That, you're describing two separate bodies of water, that the fish swimming in this sea are salt fish, they're saltwater fish. And by introducing these concepts, you'd be introducing an entirely new sea.
Well, again, it's that my earlier question was, what do you take to be essential to American capitalism? Like, and how much could we change and still have it be capitalism? I think I assume in Arimathea's vision, there are still firms, there are still boards, there is still profit. There's all this, so some of these things are still there, but they're very different. I think I was emphasizing the idea of governance or ownership
Yes.
or power, like who makes the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It looks to me like you're emphasizing things like motivation and
Yes.
culture, which are, I agree with, essential, but a little harder to get your hands on.
Yes.
Because they're largely internal. They have to do with interpretation, and like you don't see them on an org chart in a law.
Right.
And I would agree that if you want to have a better world, you'd have to change both those things.
But really, what you're calling for is conversion of hearts. Right. What you're really saying is we have to convert our hearts to Christ.
Well, I mean, if you could ask, well, supposing Jeff Bezos did convert himself, he became a devotee of Arimathea, or like you went to a retreat with y'all, and he was converted. Thanks be to God. Like, what would he do? Yeah. Like, what would he then? He's at the head of this enormous empire. Like, what would we have him do? And
I think he'd give everything away and follow Christ. That's what you would have to do.
Well, maybe, but then who's going to run Amazon, and how how are they going to run it?
Like, we don't need it. No,
it seems like maybe the right thing to do is stay at the head of Amazon and do a very different Amazon.
Yeah,
maybe that Amazon would be maybe Amazon cannot be reformed. It's too much.
Well, and I guess it kind of comes back to this question of coercion and how you get there. Right. Because I think someone could say, well, we've got to pass some laws. We're going to come down and we're going to top down to this, and we're going to say if you do that, you go to jail. You can't get paid like Bernie Sanders. You can't have a CEO getting paid 5 trillion% more than the poorest worker, and a top-down kind of legislative regulatory approach, which has been tried and I think found wanting. And then, of course, maybe you would agree with this, that your approach seems more cultural, that you're arguing for kind of an evangelization approach where we sort of woo these folks over to the truth that Christ is presenting of how we should live our lives within a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect that very much. But is there a place for both? Can we have both a cultural and religious push towards these corporations adopting Catholic social teaching in some way?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and some sophisticated kind of smuggling we could do into their corporations, while also bringing in political power. You are a political economist, so bringing in the political power to force the coercion, to force them, a forcible coercion to bring them to not bring them to Christ. You can't force anyone to Christ, but to bring them towards this space of truth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't see myself as advocating primarily a cultural change, although I do think that's part of it, because clearly one of the reasons that Jeff Bezos or people do these, people act in what we standard capitalist ways is because of an imaginary they have of what a business is, how it works. I doubt that Jeff Bezos is actually a self-interested jerk, or at least most big CEOs are. They probably see themselves as doing good work, as serving society, because there's a theory that says, make the most money you can and society will be served, or whatever. And that is not usually framed as self-interest, as because it's good for you. No, actually, you're serving everybody. It happens to be good for you too. So so
how
they probably have the kind of I don't see people as explicitly self-interested. I think most people want to say, I live in a moral world. I'm not a jerk. I'm doing good things, and I assume that's true of CEOs too.
You have a very big and soft heart.
Themselves about why what other people would see as self-interest is good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so a cultural change is part of what you need to do that, but then you have like the level of sort of if that's the level of, I don't know, you have culture, then you have something like, what other changes do you need? Well, changes in the governance and incentives of the firm. So who has power in the firm? Another thing would be, how do firms operate? Well, in part they operate because they're in a competitive environment and they need, there are certain things they feel like they have to do or they're going to die. If something is a survival requirement, it's hard to tell somebody not to do it. It's hard to tell a firm, don't do this and go bankrupt. That's
pay a living wage or else,
something to say, I will stand on this principle and go bankrupt. So those incentives, which in part part have to do with like the environment around them. How do you change those things? Again, so Jeff is not just has a vision internally. There's these incentives about, how Amazon needs to survive. Then there are things like, as I said, firm governance, or like how firms are structured, which is in part a matter of firms deciding themselves how they want to be structured, and is a part a matter of the law, because the law gives, especially for a big firm, gives a lot of direction about who has power, how often the board has to meet, whose responsibilities are to what. So some of those the laws that need to be changed are not things like monopoly laws or big laws, but how our firms are constructed.
Like you don't want the CEO sitting on the board.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing where you have this sort of incestuous relationship between the board and the C-level executives. And I think that's really come from the secular world. I mean, the reforms that we've seen in corporate governance in the ESG, environmental social governance space, the G part has largely come from the left. I would argue. I don't think that thinkers like yourself have had the same influence that some of the others have had. I mean, I'm thinking of like activist investors and whatnot, in moving governance towards something more democratic and less focused on the top. However, in our movement towards a more democratic governance, the result has been something radically less democratic, which is the disparity of wealth between the workers and the owners. And that when you look at the amount of assets that the CEOs and sort of the C-level executives possess, and even the board members possess, is radically much larger, enormous in comparison to the rest of the folks that are, living and working on workaday life. And that this result, perhaps unintentional, but I would argue has kind of come out of this governance movement, that better governance has resulted in richer CEOs.
Well, I don't know all the details of what you're referring to, but I do know, I think there's a tendency, perhaps both for Catholics and maybe for people on the left who would be in the G of ESG, to be kind of moralizing about it. Or it's like they're thinking in terms of symbols. or something like that. We want this like symbolic participation of this.
Mhm.
We want to make sure that certain minorities are resembled, but
Mhm.
symbolically. Whereas to me, you've got to also think about, think about stuff. Like, what is the most important symbol a company has to say what they value? Who gets paid?
Mhm.
They can talk all you want about, we care about this, we care about that. Like, I think it's, although I believe in symbols and sacraments and whatever, like,
Of course.
follow the money, and that's how you know what,
Yep.
it's like you want to know what someone cares about, see how they spend their time
Yeah.
primarily, and their money,
Money is
mainly their
literally a measurement of value.
time.
So,
Right.
yeah, of course.
Exactly. Like,
So
what do you
what you
value?
value is what
Who
you
do you
spend your
pay?
money on.
So
And yeah.
exactly. So if we have a sort of excessively symbolic or moralizing approach to democracy or democratic, whatever, you can end up with these bizarre
Well,
paradoxes.
that's Mount
Uh,
Tommy in
and I
New
think
York.
thinking about the common good, which again seems like a very symbolic, like kind of sort of out there thing. Common good thinking ought to really be bound up with what institutions look like, who actually is getting paid, who's actually got power to make decisions, how much time, how, it's that sort of very on the ground thing, because that's where your community like shows its vision of flourishing and flourishes or not. So again, those material things are never the whole story, but they are a big part of the story. And so to talk about the common good, if it means anything, it better have some kind of meaning at that level too.
Well, I think you've actually articulated a very serious difference between your position and Bernie Sanders' position. I mean, you look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, he only speaks in symbols. I mean, he's a politician. He's trying to work up the proletariat or something. I don't know. But,
Right.
He talks about the CEOs having unlimited money and everybody else not having any money, and this
Right.
disparity which has grown over time. And he then is arguing that the concentration of wealth is intrinsically evil. Yeah, and I think your position is mediated and reasonable, and that is, symbols are interesting, but at the end of the day, if their disparity is so great between the haves and the have-nots, but the have-nots have more, it's beneficial in this common good perspective. I would love for Bernie Sanders and Jeff Bezos, I guess they're like opposite ends of the spectrum, to adopt your particular ethos on this question. And I perhaps would say it's beautiful what you've illustrated and what you're moving towards. I think it's also idealistic. I don't have a problem with that. I'm a bit of an idealist myself, but it is idealistic. And perhaps that's just the milieu in which you work, being a professor. But to take the idealism of what you've described and distill it down into practical behaviors, I think would be important for our audience.
Right.
And so if you were to be speaking to an investor, so let's say somebody's choosing to invest in one of these companies and become an owner alongside Jeff Bezos and Amazon or whatever company, how would you say that your argument for the common good and these corporations participating in the common good through their existence and function, how is an investor supposed to respond to this? Should they make different decisions? This is a nice idea, but what does it mean to me as an investor when I'm making my choice to place that trade?
Right. That's a good question. I mean, for the most part, it seems like I think the idea of the common good is supposed to be guiding people who are making decisions, or like people who are making a difference in a business. And for the most part, unless you're a big investor, like you probably actually can't you're not going to make much of a difference. So it seems like it's your role to just choose and promote and invest in companies that are already doing it, so that someone else is doing this right and you want to support them, as opposed, whereas if you were private equity or you were a big investor, then you could say like, you guys are doing okay and we're actually going to make you do it better. But most people don't have that. They're powerless, so to speak.
Yeah, it's got a 401k,
Right. I'll just have what do I do with my 401k? I mean, again, given the perspective, I think is the company serves the common good, or sort of like society broadly, primarily by being a good company, by the stuff that it does in its day to day. So you don't want to look, so of course there are stuff you wouldn't want companies that do things that are intrinsically evil or that invest in, I don't know, but like what a company's politics is, for the most part, I don't care. Like it doesn't matter. That's pretty irrelevant, or that's pretty marginal to what it's about. So you could look at how it treats its people, how it is. If I would love to see Catholics sponsoring things like, I don't know, things that involve some kind of cooperative governance or some kind of, not necessarily, I guess if it's employee owned, you can't invest in it as an outsider, but things where, they're looking for ways of involving the people that reflect the fact that the company is a community, or CEOs who are themselves cognizant of that and sort of need your investment, and like where your money could help them scale up or help them grow the model that they already have. I mean, if investors only invest in the bottom line, then we won't be able to distinguish between, maybe some companies are profitable on this model and some are profitable on another model, and you won't be able to distinguish between them. So you need to sort of look, I guess, a bit closer. I mean, you tell me, you're an investing guy. You could tell me how you see that from the
Yeah,
outside.
certainly. Yeah.
I don't know.
No,
But that's
and Holy Mother Church has given us a set of lenses to actually look through to divine these particular things. And I think you touched on this perhaps tangentially, and I think it's really cool, Mark. But the different parties that are interested or benefiting, or maybe even detrimentally, or whatever, you have owners, employees. I would say investors that aren't like owners on the board. I think they have slightly different interests sometimes.
Right.
And then you have customers. And then I would argue you have society at large through taxation of these corporations. So I would argue there's 5 main participants, all of whom have competing interests in this corporation, some significant overlap amongst them and sometimes not. And the balancing act is very interesting, because what has happened in American capitalism is the bias towards the owners is so tremendous. It has largely come at the detriment of the other 4 participants in that common good. And I think you're calling for something that is just more balanced. And it's a very Catholic approach. It's not favoring one necessarily over the other, although there's a preferential option for the poor, of course. We do have that always in our back of our mind, as Christ has a preferential, option in a sense for the poor as well. But I think this balancing of interest that you've identified in the common good is really quite beautiful. And I want to just say, where can people buy your book? So your book is The Price of the Common Good. Where should they buy it?
Well, I think you can buy it either on Amazon, although maybe against what we said about Amazon, you shouldn't. You can also buy it directly from Notre Dame Press. The sticker price is ordinarily kind of expensive, but Notre Dame puts it on 40% sale pretty often. So if you're interested, so it goes down from 65, which is, I think, an unreasonably pricey book, to something like 38 or something like that, which is also not cheap, but more palatable. So if you just if you go to the Notre Dame website, they'll say, we're running our winter sale right now. Or like this weekend, they're running I don't know when this comes out, but on the 13th of November, they're running their Notre Dame Fall Conference sale. So they put it on sale frequently. And if someone wanted it, and they could email me and I could notify them or whatever when it's going on sale. But Notre Dame Press is a good place to buy.
Excellent.
Hopefully it will come out in paperback and
bring that price down. Preferential option for the poor. Those of us who want to spend like $10 on a book. In all seriousness, I want to say, Dr. Mark Hoipkemier, you have been a wonderful guest on Treasures in Heaven. It's been a real honor to interview you. I think that the ideas that you've illustrated in your book and that you've illustrated today on our show are deeply Catholic and by definition deeply beautiful. So thank you very much for being with us today, both as a guest, and also thank you very much to our audience for listening and watching our podcast today. And God bless you all.